a little panel discussion. I'm going to get, we've got Ravi, who's already introduced himself, so I'm going to get the other three members of the panel to introduce themselves and explain a little bit about what they do in shared accommodation space. So if I can start with you, Anne, tell everyone a little bit about what you do.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Ranjan Bhattacharya. We HMO office space to provide a code workspace. That's my kind of big thing at the moment, and because of the decline in yields, we're moving away from residential opportunities to larger office opportunities. But one thing I'd like to say is the first time I was introduced to co-living, it was about 20 years ago, even before the HMO buzzword got so big and everybody started to build HMOs from a revenue perspective. When I moved to London, given my age about 20 years ago, the first place I moved into was in Earl's Court, and there were 5 flatmates, and we had a small kitchen area, but 5 amazing rooms. Every single day they were cleaned, the communal parts were cleaned. We had 2 bathrooms. We were literally a minute and a half from the station, and in the evenings we would be going out. In fact, we'd get a text, because mobile phones had just been introduced. We'd get a text and say, oh, we're in or out tonight, and where we're meeting. There'd be a number of venues, pubs, bars, cafes, and that was my first experience. And because it was, every room was painted every time somebody moved out, all the maintenance done, the landlord lived next door, and it was in a lovely news house, and that was a great experience. So when I moved out to that property and bought my first flat, the second flat I bought, the investment flat, was in Earl's Court, and it was tiny. It was a studio, about 347 square feet, but extremely well designed. So that was kind of like, and it's evolved from that spaces can be small, but as long as they're well designed, they can be really, really great places to live and work.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Mike Frisby.
Evening, everybody. I'm Mike Frisby. I host the Regent's Park PIN meeting in this room, so I'm familiar with the room, which is always the week before this meeting, so do come along to that. But in terms of the... I had to get that in there right now. He does the sound, he really gets it. So anyway, in the HMO space, I've been investing since 2006. That's when I bought my first HMO, and I've been investing ever since. But the last 3 or 4 years, I've gone heavily into the professional HMO. I've done a lot of social housing as well, which some of that was shared living and wasn't really co-living in the same way, but some social housing work. And I've been rebalancing my portfolio over the last 4 years into the professional sector. So I focus on high-end professionals, a bit like Ravi, but do it in a smaller unit. So my units are typically 5, anything up to sort of 25 shared accommodation. I also do the micro units as well, so we do where we can, which prove very, very popular, but there's always problems with planning, so that's generally from existing use where we buy off current landlords and top them up. The zone that I do it in, I live in the southeast, I live in Surrey, and so what I do is across the southeast, mainly on the south coast, because that's where I find good opportunities, and I take regular houses, get planning permission for C4 because the areas I operate in are often Article 4, so I've studied that and learned that very well, and often then take them on to sui generis, and we go through the steps to ensure that we get the planning and overcome the planning objections. So that's what we do. I generally buy around 100 rooms, or renovate 100 rooms a year. I have been for the last couple of years. So we've got a machine going on the south coast. So hopefully I can help answer questions tonight.
Good evening, ladies and gents. My name is Chopra. I'm a property investor. That's why I guess I'm here. My journey started back in 2010, and very quickly I realised that I definitely need to keep the HMOs to get myself out of a job. So I bought myself 2 HMOs, and by 2012 I was financially free. So I've been investing in HMOs ever since. I think we were sort of I think we're about 51 units, so I'm nowhere as big as any of these guys. We've got a small portfolio, and up until very recently I was managing it myself along with my business partner and husband Ravi, who's in the front row here. Ravi, you want to give him a wave? And our HMOs are mainly around Reading, Bracknell, so Berkshire area, for those of you who may be familiar with it. professional rooms. Generally, room rents are about 500 plus for a normal double room to up to about 750 for an ensuite, large ensuite room. Yeah, that's about it for me now, but I'll look at all your questions.
Brilliant. So we're going to take questions from the floor. We've got a great experienced panel. I do quite a few micro units. I've been doing micro units since 2008 actually. So sort of chip in the odd comment here and there. So let's go with the questions. The rules on the questions. No statements. I want to get through as many questions as possible. No part A, part B, part C. One short question, and I want to field it to get as many views as possible from the panelists. David is first at the back. First hand I saw go up, so let's see what he's got to say. Go for it.
Hello there, David Bailey. My question to the panel is, for the average investor sitting here probably with 4, 5, 6 bed HMOs, might sort of see co-living as a bit of a juggernaut coming down the road. Is it the end of small HMO investor?
He does quite a lot of small in HMO investments up in Essex, so is he stuffed basically? You guys.
It depends how good you are. How good you are to your tenants, members, maybe you convert them into members now. So I think no, because I think it works at different scales. But I think if we start to turn our attention a little bit more to what are the current pains, how do we make them gains, how do we really focus on needs, how do we deliver service, all this stuff. I think actually it works at different scales, and there's some different benefits at different scales, because when you've got 6 rooms, you can really get a really tight community in a way that when you've got 200, it becomes much more challenging. So I think there's actually benefits, pros and cons to every scale, but we all need to be good to stay alive.
I think it's very dependent on the area you're in and what's going on in there. So I know a couple of areas that my HMOs are in are quite saturated, and we're finding it harder to get tenants. It's taking that many extra viewings, that much longer. But in other areas, we have a room go out on spare room and you get 3 or 4 viewings in the next week. So I reckon it's definitely location specific. And yes, I guess the next aspirational is the co-living, which obviously us small landlords as HMOs are not able to provide that sort of service. But you've got to be careful. Just choose the right area, and as long as you're at the right place, I think you'll be fine.
Okay, let's get another question from this side of the room. Who's got a question? I've gone from this. Who's got the mic? Oh, right. Just pass
Mike's got the mic. He wants to answer the question. Got your mic.
Just in regards to back on HMOs, there's also this onslaught of new regulations coming with regards to, I think, October this year, and obviously that's, I think, also going to have an impact on all HMO landlords, whether you have 1 room or 25 rooms, I think. And I think, going back to the question that was raised before, I think as HMO landlords now, I think what Ravi is on an important point, if you don't improve the quality of the provision of service, whether you're, however big or small, whether you're a big or small HMO landlord, we've learned that. And I think Ravi touched on that point in terms of additional services. It's not just about giving them a room and forgetting about them. I think there's got to be more add value. And I think the question is, I think what we need to learn across the room is all the selling points you put. But obviously, if you've got a bunch of HMOs, you're not just going to suddenly flood them into the market and just jump into something different. I think it's a question of understanding all the points that you've raised today and taking those and seeing how you can implement them into your own business, improve it. Because the only way you're going to survive is add value, and add value in that point. The question is, all the regulations that are coming out, do you feel that that's going to, again touching on, is that going to put, how as HMO landlords, you think, how can they be best?
That's what I want to ask Mike, I think. We've done a little bit of research.
How are you, Mike? Because you've got a fairly large portfolio, all this is coming through. What are you doing to sort of circumvent all this nonsense that's being thrown out now?
Sorry, just to add a quick supplementary, do you think the imposition of all this extra regulation is going to create a minimum threshold in terms of a house that 3 rooms is unviable, or 4 rooms? Is it going to raise that threshold of viability? Go for it on regulation.
Okay, regulations, yes. Obviously, one of the key things is the licensing change in October coming up this year, where there's going to be 177,000 new licences that need to be issued. So one of the first things is obviously the councils are going to become snowed under with that, and I think it's going to take them quite a long time to implement. But I do think at that point there'll be a lot of landlords, along with the fact that we've got Section 24, just holding up their hand and saying, I give up at this stage, too much. I remember the good old days like Jim, when you didn't have to do much and you had double-digit yields everywhere. So I think there will be more people coming to the market, which either that will go back and get converted into residential stock, or other people will be picking up. So I think there will be opportunities to buy other landlords' stock, which then gives you an economies of scale. I think, would a 3-bedroom work anymore? I think less and less, potentially, if more costs are going up. But then, if you've got operations that you can run across several properties, then I think those economies of scale will make it also viable to have smaller HMOs. So in terms of the question around smaller HMOs as well, should we all be doing the massive co-living schemes? I think there's still a place for those. IKEA did some research, and actually people prefer, they said that people preferred to live in the smaller communities. I think there's a role for both, because you'll get some people who want the bigger communities and are used to that, and then you get others who would want the shared house that, they're new to an area, meet someone, become friends and go on that way. But I do believe that the standards are going up, and if you're not keeping up those standards, then you're going to die, or you'll end up renting to benefit tenants, and you're going to keep your rents low, and you're going to have to stick to the NHA rates or the universal credit rates and get heavily involved in that. And that's the other flip side as to where people might end up without realising it, and do really nice HMOs, but actually have to charge low rents to accommodate.
Can I just bring Andy on this point, because you do HMOs and the co-working commercial stuff. Can you just compare and contrast the regulation with the co-working space, if you like, with the regulation on the residential space?
Yeah, I think for us, I think co-living is great. I think, but in the same transition from residential accommodation, where you've previously had tenants and now you have customers, and now you've got guests, talking about the hotel experience, that's happened already. So whether or not it's in a large co-living building of 300-400 people cohabiting together in a community, the same can be true if you've got a portfolio of HMOs. I mean, if you've got a portfolio of HMOs, I mean, we specialise in Zone 1 and Zone 2, but if you're in Earls Court, Fulham, in the surrounding areas, it's really about how you can engage your guests to actually cohabit better together, because you don't have to bring in commercial units with coffee bars and restaurants, because it's all there. So if you're in Paddington, if you're in Earls Court, if you're in those locations, it's really about how you engage with your guests in the same way that previously bed and breakfasts have become service accommodation providers. I think it's just a natural transition. I think the guest experience is now different to what it was before. A lot of residential property owners have upped the game, and in order to compete and offer their property to the Airbnb market, they've really spent quite a lot of time, energy and money on upgrading their properties, because there's a different expectation to what there was 15, 20 years ago. Coming from the student market of today, where everything is done for you within the building, with a concierge, and somebody will collect your dry cleaning, your washing. Absolutely. And those people, and I mentioned this earlier to a couple of people, that everything in the home used to be expensive. Everything used to be considered purchase, buying a TV, buying a sofa. Now everything's a week's wages for most people. So by the time somebody's 18 or 19, they actually don't need anything, because they're not carrying Walkmans and music centres and CDs and cassettes and tape players and TVs. Everything's on the wall or in their pocket.
That is a very good point, because a lot of the space standards have been set in the 60s. And when I did rooms and stuff in the 1990s, someone would move in with so much stuff. You'd have a TV which was that deep, you'd have videos, you'd have records, you'd have so much media. Now they just roll in with an iPad and that's it. So you don't need the space anymore for the same utility.
And it's actually the same within the office market. So within our first office building, we had a huge roller deck floor, a mezzanine that you couldn't use, that we actually tried to give away because it was all fireproof document storage for a children's charity that was in the building before us. But the first thing we did was when we took over the building, we raised the ceiling, put in a workable space, and we uplifted the rentable workspace by about 30% in that building. And that's where we started with double head height units to put in mezzanine levels that we could then rent out. And we actually upped the game. It was a traditional office building, great building, but you know, if you come into our office building now, it's if it was an apartment, somewhere where you could live. So it's got nice wood floors, it's got all finishes, it's got luxury bathrooms, which don't take a huge amount of extra money to do, but it's about the experience. And it used to be that when I worked in a marketing agency, we used to have pool tables and plasma screens, and it wasn't for us, it was about the client experience coming in, thinking, I'd love to work here. And you know, you're working with a creative agency, you're working, and it's the same in a hotel. It's the difference between a boutique hotel that's successful and a bed and breakfast. The capital value may be the same, but the incomes are very, very different.
Okay, let's have this thing. Yeah.
Hiya. My question is really about community. So you've all mentioned it in many different ways, and I was just wondering what the differentiator is, other than price. So I totally appreciate that kind of comes into the macro picture, but around the community and creating community, because a lot of the new build to rent or the big plush apartments with 50 plus units all have gyms, they all have coffee shops, they've got a sort of commercial kind of standing across the bottom. What is going to differentiate you within giving extra space and having people use it? Have you got any thoughts around that?
Ravi, you want to kick off with that one?
I have one or two thoughts about that. Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and it's much more than the space, right? Because you're absolutely right, and all of these things are usually empty. So one of the big things is how do you activate these spaces, and how does space transition throughout a day as well? What, you know, is co-working, coffee shop, bar at night, you know? But the key thing is, you know, how do you build community, and which is the big question that actually I think is the really killer question that everyone's sort of struggling with. But for us, I think it's about, it comes down to making genuine human connections, and we usually do that around shared interests. So that comes down to the point of really activating, have a really active program of events that people can get around, empower your residents to create their own events. You know, I think it's something that we're going to be learning about, we're paying a lot of attention about, but absolutely the right question.
Can I just ask Manny to comment? Because I know that you do smaller HMOs, but I also know that you create communities through your WhatsApp groups and birthdays and stuff. Do you want to comment on how people can do it at a small level?
Yeah.
Because that's very
Actually, I think it's a very important point, and just discussing it the other day, because we've got 2 HMOs, literally pair of semis. In the first HMO, we didn't create a living room, and we found that HMO wasn't doing well. The turnover was really quick. People were coming in and moving in within 6 to 9 months, which is not the average. Average is typically in our HMOs between 9 to 18 months. And the next HMO, we made sure we didn't make the same mistakes, so we provided them with a good-sized living room, a nice TV with Virgin channels and all that stuff. And it's a massive difference just creating a small living room space with flat-screen TV. And I tell you what, in that house, we've hardly had anybody leave. And even when they've left, they're like, oh, it's a shame I have to move because I've got a job somewhere else. But I think, and again, WhatsApp groups. So what we do is, as a tenant comes on, we add them onto a WhatsApp group that I run, and basically keep all the issues on it. You know, if there's issues, leakages, whatever, if they put on there, and then we sort of acknowledge people for any help that they've given to other people. It's just like you said, it's just simple stuff like that.
You do birthdays as well, do you? Or
we don't do birthdays, but we have the
right.
VIP community. I think we're probably mixing up the VIP community with J6. But I think it's just that little touch of, you know, when they could check in, and like you said, a bit of a small gift for them, over Christmas, that sort of stuff. But I think every little helps, like you say.
Mike, how do you create a community?
I think we need to be. I think it's good to create community, but I also want to put some caveats in, which is I think sometimes we all go a bit over the top with community of like, this must be the only thing that's going to get you anywhere within the HMO market, which, you know, it still comes down to location and having great rooms and great sizes and great positioning. That is crucially important. Yes, moving forward, I think community is good and vital, but we also must remember not to be too much of Big Brother-ish and try and cultivate it within the building themselves, rather than, they don't want us to create their community. You just need to give them the tools to create your own community, so the WhatsApps and things, getting that going within that, and then letting them run it themselves, rather than us sort of try and push things on them. Because that isn't how it goes back to parenting and all of that kind of stuff, you know. They don't want to think that we're sort of looking at it that way. And it's just customer service in terms of you know, making sure everything is running correctly in your HMO. And the biggest thing is always to that generation, internet. So make sure your internet never goes down and you'll never get anything moving out.
I think one of the big things we're doing in commercial community, in commercial space, if you want to create community by encouraging people to run events. But if you're running HMOs, the last thing you want is your residents running events. I'm going to get a little bit. Okay, let's Andrew. Let's get the microphone to Andrew.
Hi, I just want to address the issue of culture, if I may, because if you kind of walk around...
So what did you say? I missed that.
Issue of culture.
Oh, culture.
So if you walk around the average town city, you'll see you know, bookish, studious types rushing to work and who are not quite quiet. You have people who are wearing football regalia and sporting tattoos and singing loudly outside pubs. How do you balance that so whether the two various communities don't tread on each other's toes, or do you deliberately advertise to try and get synergistic groups of people who kind of think alike, who do alike, who dress alike in each individual housing unit?
Okay, I think I'm going to get everyone to comment on this, because I think everyone does a bit of social engineering on their properties.
Two points to that. One is the way that you fit out and stage your accommodation, whether it's residential or commercial, and the other is price. So in terms of the community, you know, we're focusing on professional renters, people who are working, employed, and we have a profile, an age band, a sort of a salary requirement to run them through referencing, because we are asking for slightly premium rents, and that's determined by the location. So if you're in zone 1 and you want to benefit from everything that's around you, in terms of cinemas, coffee shops, etc., then there's a price point that you have to pay. If you uplift the level of your accommodation, then you can get more, a bit like Airbnb rates versus longer stage ASTs. But equally, you can create value. So if you are building a HMO and you've got a guest house and it's 15 or 20 rooms, and it's in, say, zone 4, which is probably likely to be in a more of a family mix area, so it's probably, you know, different demographic profile. I think area has a lot to do with what you're saying. I think depending on the zoning of London and where people want to be and the price point, I think that naturally tackles the community side of things in a way. So if you've got young professionals up in zone 1 or 2, but also with Crossrail, that zoning is changing. So in the same way as Ealing now is becoming the new zone 1/2 because of the journey time from Ealing Broadway into Bond Street. It's like somebody going from Earl's Court into Bond Street. In fact, it's probably quicker now from Ealing. So that's going to have its own change, and that's going to see. I think, you know, again, I pick on Ealing because it's similar to parts of Clapham where you've got the big traditional buildings, or Streatham, which may have been converted to HMOs in the past. And I think you'll see more of that, perhaps price and demand and you know, those places up in their game to get a higher price point.
Mike, how do you socially engineer?
Yeah, there is the price point aspect that does, I think, you know, the presentation, the price point, and the location does dictate some of it. It's also where we market to a degree to try and generate interest in the HMO. So there's obviously the traditional routes of going through Rightmove and Spare Room and things, but these days, certainly you'll find probably for Ravi's areas, you know, those are going to be fairly dormant places to advertise the property, because the social media side is far more prevalent. And if you're attracting people on social media through the media, through that format, then they're going to be slightly different to another group of people. So I think the places where you advertise also dictate who you get through the door, and then you can play. And then if you have a variety of properties, you can always place people in different locations.
Could you briefly elaborate what you meant by social media then?
Yeah, I mean, just classically, just you can pay for advertising on the on the Instagrams and the Facebooks of this world. That's where we're moving our marketing and discovering that we're getting better. I think we're getting better results. We're still early days in that zone for property, but I think everybody puts their room on a spare room. So if you want to stand out and look at attract different people, you have to go in different places.
I think for us it's fairly standard. We've got generally white-collar, full-time working professionals. So I think it's pretty much all of what they've said. So we don't really, I guess maybe I'm doing autopilot, but yeah, it's the same old social media websites. Facebook's quite good, because all the areas have their own rooms to rent, for example, rooms to rent in Reading and stuff like that, so we're advertising those. Again, price point, I think it's very similar to what I think you guys just mentioned, actually.
Okay. I think I just wanted to add a couple of bits. I think it's very important to try to make sure that people will try to sort of gel together. And the reason why you want to do that is it lessens the turnover of people moving in and out and lessens the void because people stay longer. In fact, the biggest problem sometimes is when it gets too successful. In terms of people move out because two of the people in your accommodation are getting a place together. So sometimes the community building can be quite successful for that sort of reason. But the other thing I'd like to sort of share is that I've just been thinking from a lot of the comments that are coming about. We, over the last few months, I've been quite, I've just sort of noticed, it's dawned on me, the amount of existing tenants that have recommended our accommodation to their friends. So people are sort of seeing something on Rightmove, and an existing tenant is ringing up saying, well, I've got a friend who wants that place. They can sort of take the room above or whatever it is like that. And that is kind of stirring up ideas in that, well, if this is happening anyway, wouldn't it be better to actually market that in a much more overt way? Because friends of friends is a very, very good source. Now that's probably going to be a key part of your strategy if you're looking at 300 rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably to touch on what Mike said, it's just a lot of the marketing it's going to be content based, and so it comes back to hopefully somewhat a reflection of what you put out, right? So who's that attracting, who's buying into those sort of shared values and so on. But,
Okay. Anyone else? I think we'll take. Let's take Jamie's question. Sorry?
I said, dare you.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm making myself go for it.
How realistic do you think you are talking about HMOs? HMOs traditionally house unemployed, the lower paid. The people you're talking about are not HMO clients. You're almost comparing camping with five-star hotels. You've probably been a bit lucky. The kind of tenants most HMO landlords have, if Ravi had one of them roll up to his door, he'd call the police. So, going back to David Daly's worry about our HMOs dead, what kind of figures are we talking about in as much as how many of the traditional HMO tenants are still around and are still being in demand? But I don't think any of you are going to want to house the DSS.
So, what's the question?
What was the question? Yeah, sorry, what's the question?
How realistic are you with calling an HMO?
An HMO houses traditionally poor people, and you're housing the elite.
Well, if I want to fly to New York, we all sit on one plane. But some people can go first and pay a bit extra to get a certain service. Some people can go cabin class at the back. It's just like that. If I want to have a cup of coffee, I can have it in a worker's cab for 60p, but down the same road I have to pay $2.50 for the Starbucks experience. I think that's probably upside because reusable cups and all that. But I think what we're trying to say is in any business, your profit margin is better if you focus on the quality end. And I think that a lot of these guys geographically are probably in areas where there are more of that attractive customer base. So if you can focus on the higher margin end, which is probably easier to manage, then why not? But I think that's going to be a big problem for UK. Where are the rest going to go if everyone's upping their game?
And I think in London we don't call properties by HMO. A lot of them are multi-share properties or professional share properties, and that's the way that they're marketed. And I totally agree with you that there are certain areas where HMOs and other properties will cater for a certain demographic group of renters, because that's ultimately what it is. But that's the same is true of, let's not say a premium hotel, but a 3-star or 4-star hotel. There's a big gap between somebody that wants to pay £70 or £80 in a 3 or 4-star hotel to £150. And I think we just developed 2 HMOs in Clapham, but we don't call them HMOs. They're fitted out, they're done to a really, really good standard. We took them back to brick. We've got great sized rooms because obviously regulations are changing. So they are almost like individual apartments within a building, whereby sharers who are either friends who work together or in similar businesses. So we had a group of medical professionals that came in. They all knew each other. They wanted a house, and they were more than happy. It was done. The house has been done to a really good standard, and regardless of the look and feel of the house and the postcode area, the interior would probably be the same if we were to do the same house in zones 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just because it doesn't cost that much more, but then the guest experience is so much higher, so you can command a premium. Now there is still a market for the HMO type of for people that are perhaps living in small spaces or out of work. Then you've got to cater for that, but it doesn't mean you can't give them a good guest experience. Whether it's what I think expectations are changing, and the quality of what people demand is different to what it was 15, 20 years ago.
I just wanted to ask a related question to Mike. I mean, I know in the past you've done a little bit of social housing, but you have migrated to doing more professional housing. Can you just comment on your reasons for making that sort of switch and how you see the benefit?
Yeah, there were several reasons for a migration, for balancing, for. I mean, obviously,
What do you mean by balancing?
What I mean by balancing the portfolio is if you're heavily orientated around one sector, then obviously if there's a big change in that sector, then you're more vulnerable. That can have a big impact on your income. So having been quite heavily reliant on the whole social housing side, obviously when the government started announcing universal credit and cuts, I could see in the future, there'll be little inflation within the whole rents in that sector. So therefore, my costs continue to go up, my margins would continue to go down, and obviously their key thing was to reduce the amount that they were paying out. Therefore, I could see over time that was going to get tighter and tighter in terms of the margins in that sector, unless you were doing quite heavily creative things, which are then harder to systemise and harder to run on a mass scale. So that was one reason, because I could see, and in the same time, professional rents have increased a lot. So when I first started migrating across or was looking at social housing, I'd get a lot more for a social housing tenant than I would for a single professional. Whereas now it's reverse. At some places I can get almost double the rent than I would through a social housing. So you can see there's some economics at play there that's drifted. The other thing is, by getting better rents and by the way that financing was working, they're not so keen to work with people in the social housing sector. They will, and there are lenders that will, so you just need to know and have experience in that sector. But I do a lot of commercial refinancing and recycling with cash, and the professional sector is far easier to do that. So in order to continue to acquire on a sort of quite aggressive scale that I do, I like to recycle quite a lot of cash, and the professional market was one of the reasons to do that. So I looked to rebalance, get a better balance between professional and students and social tenants, so that any one sector, because if you're, for example, a student landlord, and then they go and build a massive block, or even up sticks, for example, I believe it's Swansea, they up sticks and moved the university from one end of the town to the other, and built a whole load of blocks. So poor old student landlords who thought they probably had, you know, tenants for life, suddenly have 0 tenants down that end and all trying to sell, and it's a bit of a disaster. So you might have had the best houses in the best streets and the best roads. So there is an aspect of, you know, I do look at the overall business and try and keep balanced and those kind of things. So that was another one of the reasons. But commercial finance, pure profit, also ease, yeah, I guess, as well. I think professionals and moving that way, for me, was more exciting as well, from a personal perspective.
I just want to throw a question to some of you guys. A lot of people have jumped on the HMO bandwagon in recent years. Many areas have seen a lot of people convert any old single let into multiple rooms, and some areas are experiencing a little bit of saturation in the room let market. So my question is that if you're operating in an area which is face saturation, what are you doing now to get those let, which you weren't doing a few years ago when times were better?
Yes, I think we're particularly struggling with one of the areas you may know, Reading. Historically, it's been very popular for HMOs, and I guess HMOs and combination of rent-to-rents is saturated market. So what we are doing is obviously have to reduce the rents a little bit, but also said to the existing tenants that we give them £100 referral fees for referring a friend. So that's worked a couple of times. Yeah, I mean, it's just doing some good videos, you know, showing not just the house, but its surrounding area and what the facilities are, just giving them a bit of flavour of what they're getting themselves into lifestyle. Yeah, a bit of everything really. It is hard out there, but yes, you have to make sure that your room's obviously, you know, nice and clean, bedding, all that sort of staging it, you know, quite nicely. All that helps, I think.
Mike, do you want to
Yeah. So again, we go back to community. I do try and foster a bit of community in some of the houses. So if tenants can recommend, I very much heavily going down the referral routes. We had an instance the other day, I didn't even know a room was coming empty, and we had some money in our account. That was because a friend wanted her friend to move in to that house and was reserving it before actually we had been given notice. So it really does work if you get the community thing going, and then I guess trying different routes to advertising, as well as doing all the dressings and, you know, just building what man was saying, coming back to the social media, and trying to get lower turnover as well, to keep hold of those tenants, because that's, you know, then they're not moving on, then you don't have any voids and you don't have to fill them.
And admin and all the rest of it. And I think the other thing about these, what I found is the importance of decent pictures, particularly when you're dealing with friends of friends. Because they have been recommended by an existing tenant, they are often willing to take the property based on photos. And that's I mean, I'm amazed that people are willing to let a place just based on seeing photographs. And again, I mean, to talk about Ravi's point about technology, I think all of us have got to think about how we can better use technology and software and simple stuff. I mean, one of the things that we're looking to trial this summer is the 360-degree camera. Because you can take multiple pictures, but if you stick a plonker 360-degree camera in the middle of a thing, and then put that on a page on the web, and allow people to do up, down, left, right arrows to see everything, that's very, very powerful. So I think, you know, this is the way things are going to go.
And you need to do that at the time when you've just recently refurbished it. So get the photos when it's looking at perfect, keep those photos and keep sticking those photos back up, rather than, obviously, once you've got someone in there and you've got, you know, if you go into that room and try and take a photo, you've got all their belongings in there, you've got all this kind of stuff. So
that's where we got wrong, because we've got socks on the radiator.
Yeah, exactly. That's so do it, you know, do it when you first get the HMO and it's empty. Otherwise, you're potentially waiting for all that rubbish to go out the room and taking a decent photo then. So do it up front, buy the cushions, lots of cushions, get colours that spark out at you, so you've got to think not just to the visual eye in the room, but a visual eye on a photograph that can just be a thumbnail on one of these portals. So you've got to think down to that detail of how is your customer actually going to see it, because they're going to, again, they're probably not going to be on a computer, they're going to be on their mobile.